Hello and welcome to Dice and Demons. I'm Emma, and in this video I'm going to show you how I paint some Raptadon Chargers for my Lollipop Lizards, my Seraphon army for Age of Sigmar. So because it's for my Lollipop Lizards, of course it's going to be really bright and with lots of fluorescent colors. So with that said, let's get going. So I start off with a model that's been primed using the White Scars primer from Citadel, and then I paint all over the body and the feathers with a contrast paint called Croxigore Scales, which is a nice turquoise color. And I'm going to be using the so-called slap chop method, where I first have a darker color underneath and then dry brushing on top of that to give more depth and light and shadow. And then I'm going to be painting it afterwards using the sort of correct colors that I actually want the model to be. Often you'll see people do this with gray tones, so you would, for instance, prime it with a black primer and then dry brush it, and you can definitely do that, but I think it tends to make the colors a little bit desaturated, and I don't want that for this particular paint job, so that's why I'm going with some different colors for the base coat. Then for the larger feathers on top of its head and also on the forearms and the tail, I painted using the Lollipop pink contrast paint. The reason for using the pink as an undertone is because I want these feathers to be a nice warm tone of yellow, and pink is just a really nice undercoat for painting yellow. Once the contrast paint is all dry, I hit it with some dry brushing, and I'm using, as you can see here, a makeup brush and just then some white paint. I'm not that great at dry brushing, and I honestly don't much like the look, well, at least not when I'm doing it, because it gets this sort of dusty, chalky look. But because I'm going to be painting a lot of layers over it, it doesn't matter too much, and I don't have to be too careful with how the dry brush goes on. Then I can start actually painting the real color I want this model to have. And for the body, I'm using Striking Scorpion Green, which is another contrast paint from Citadel. You'll hear me using a lot of contrast paints for this, and it's both because I enjoy working with contrast paints. I like that they go on smoothly in one coat. You don't have to do multiple coats for the first base layers of the model, and I just find that's quite easy, quick, and satisfying to do. And also because I really like some of the colors, especially something like the Striking Scorpion Green. Then for the smaller feathers on the body, I use Doomfire Magenta, also a contrast paint, and it's a really nice vivid pink that I thought would work really well, since I'm really gonna try to make the green pop on this one. I want the small feathers to be equally striking, so I thought a really nice bright pink would work really well. Then I use a yellow contrast paint. This is Flash Kids Yellow, and I'm using that for the large feathers on top of the head here, as you can see. And while I really liked the idea I had with the yellow feathers, as I was painting them, I wasn't quite sure whether or not this was right, but I decided to go with it and see where it would take me, and then I could always repaint it if I ended up not really liking it after all. Then I painted the ridges on the large feathers. I'm not quite sure if ridge is the correct English term, but I hope you'll get what I mean here. And for that I used the Talazar Blue, also a contrast paint, and I thought that blue would work well as a contrast to the yellow on the feathers themselves, and also work quite well with the green on the body. I'm painting these Raptadon Chargers as a unit. I want them to be in my Seraphon army and to put on the tabletop. But the one I'm filming, I painted first, some of it, and then I painted the 4 that was left to do. And it turned out I went much heavier on the dry brushing on the 4 than I did on the one I showed here on camera. And I thought about redoing it, but in the end I decided against it, because this is after all for a tabletop and they don't have to be exactly the same. And also I can just highlight it up as I get further along in the painting process. I also decided I didn't really like the look of the yellow on the feathers, because they simply looked a little bit too washed out compared to all the rest of the colors on this model. So I repainted them using some Magmadroth Flame, which is also a contrast paint. Then it was time to start highlighting the green skin, and for that I used a color called Gamma Green, which is one of the fluorescent paints from Huge Miniatures, and I had mixed in a little bit of Flashgitz Yellow from Citadel with it because the contrast paints by their very nature are very cold, and I wanted the first layer of highlights to be just a slightly warmer tone, just because I thought otherwise it would end up looking really, really cold, and I didn't want that. I thinned it down quite a bit. It's not actually a glaze, but it's quite thin so that it would go on fairly smoothly, while at the same time not being so thin that it would require like 5 layers before you could actually see some effect, because after all, as I said, this is for a tabletop and I need to be able to do 5 of these at the same standard so that I can actually have them for my army and go play games and tournaments and such with them. Then I used the same colors but a little bit thicker to paint the sort of feathery markings here on the far end of the body. And the reason it's a little bit thicker when I use it here is just because it's a little bit easier to control, and the surfaces I'm painting are much smaller, so it's not as important that it is really smooth. It's much more important that I can be precise with it. And here you can see on my wet palette the 3 different green colors I'm using for the body. First, on the right you have the mix of the Flashgitz Yellow and the Gamma Green. Then you have a much brighter and colder green, which is also from Huge Miniatures, called Quantum Green. And then lastly you have a fluorescent yellow, which is called Starfire Yellow, also from Huge Miniatures. And these are the 3 colors I'm using to highlight this mini. So the next step is using the Quantum Green, and again for the bigger surfaces I have it thinned well down, and then for the smaller details I use it in a little bit more of a thicker consistency, and then lastly I apply the Starfire Yellow where I think it's appropriate. Then for highlighting the blue ridges, I use a color from Vallejo called Aquamarine, and I first use it straight out of the bottle, and then I use it mixed with a little bit of white to add some highlights to the tip of the ridges. I decided to go with an aquamarine, so a sort of turquoise color instead of a just straight blue color, because I thought it would work a little bit better with the green body of the model, without looking too similar. You can still definitely see the 2 different colors. I just thought it would, it would work just slightly better. But I mean, you could definitely also just go with blue. I just, I do think I have a preference for a turquoise, if I'm gonna be honest. Then for the feathers, I wanted to make sure that they had a little bit of a feathery pattern. So I am using another of the fluorescent colors from Huge Miniatures. This one is called Laser Orange. And I just paint in, as you can see, some diagonal lines to sort of simulate the look of feathers. I thought it would be nice to have this as a different kind of texture to the rest of the model. I also do a quick edge highlight just to make sure that it's very easy to see where the feathers sort of begin or end next to the blue ridges. For the final highlight for the feathers, I'm using Flashgitz Yellow, which is an ordinary yellow color and not a fluorescent color. And that is because, as I said, the fluorescent colors tend to be a little bit cold and the Flashgitz Yellow is warm. And I wanted these feathers to have a nice warm tone to them because the rest of the model is fairly cold, and so I thought it would give a nice bit of contrast with just a little touch of warmth that definitely wouldn't hurt the model. Then I wanted to paint the small feathers in a really bright pink that would really pop against the green body of the rest of the model. And at first I used one of the pink paints from Huge Miniatures, and this one is called Pulse Wave Pink, and it is a nice vibrant fluorescent color, but it just didn't stand out enough against the green. So I decided to up the fluorescence and the, poppiness of the pink color by mixing in some pure pink pigment. And this is a pigment from Green Stuff World, and it's just called Fluor Pigments Pink, and it is very pink. So these 2 colors mixed together gives you a really nice vibrant pink color that you can use for stuff like this, highlighting small feathers. I would not advise you to use this with the pigments mixed in on larger smooth surfaces, because it does tend to look a little bit uneven, a little bit grainy, particularly on larger surfaces. But on small stuff like this, it's barely noticeable. And again, this is for a tabletop, and I want it to really pop also from a distance. So for this project, it's perfect, but just be a little bit careful if you want to do the same on something like a tank or something where you want these large smooth surfaces, because then you might be a little bit disappointed with the final result. Perhaps if you have one of those fancy mixers, like a vortex mixer or something, perhaps you can do it then. I don't, so I haven't tried it, but I mean, it's something that you could give a go if you're interested. I then add a final highlight, just the same colors, just mixed with a little bit of white, just for the tip of the small feathers. I don't do this sort of really precisely with every single tiny feather, because that would take quite a long time, and I'm gonna paint an entire unit and perhaps more of these. So yeah, just a touch here and there to make the colors just stand out a little bit from each other. And that was the Raptadon itself, but it also has a rider, and I'm going to show you here how I painted that. And I started off with the same method that I used for the Raptadon. I painted basically all over with the Croxagore scales, so that I can use that as a basis for the slap chop that I'm going to be applying later on. So once more, you have the dry brush using the makeup brush. And my idea was that I could get a nice turquoise bluish skin tone with very little work, because I was trying to cut corners, because I was honestly mostly interested in painting the Raptadon, which I thought was a really fun challenge, and not so much painting the skink rider. I have painted so many skinks for my Seraphon army, and I mean, they're fine, don't get me wrong, but after a while it tends to lose just a little bit of the original charm, I find. So I was trying to be really quick and efficient, which turned out to be not the best idea I ever had, because then I wanted to paint it, as you can see I'm doing here, with another contrast paint, and this one is called Athematic Blue. It's sort of a nice lighter turquoise color, and I thought that I could just leave the skin like this and it would be fine. But I ended up not really liking the look. I don't really know what it was. It just looked kind of off, and not the way I had hoped for at all. So I knew I had to go back and redo it. Then for the scales on its back, I painted that with a Keelian green, which is also a contrast paint. And it's not really because I particularly want it to be a Keelian green, but it's because I want those darker colors, particularly in the cracks between each scale, just so that I don't have to go back and sort of paint a dark line around each and every one. I just want something to make it nice and easy to see exactly where each scale starts and ends. Then for the feathers on its head, I wanted it to be something that went from green through yellow to red. And so I did a quick wet blend using first a green color called Warp Lightning. These are all contrast paints. Then I used Yandan Yellow. And lastly, I used Blood Angels Red. And as you can see, it's just a really quick wet blend, and it's by no means perfect, but I'm going to be highlighting the feathers later on. So it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be a nice base color from which to work. And for that, I think this worked fairly well. Again, as you can see, it's not that smooth, but it's okay. Again, this is for a tabletop, so it doesn't have to be perfect at all. And yeah, every single time someone says, oh, is this good enough to put on the tabletop? Any painted model is better than an unpainted model, so don't ever feel bad about putting something on the tabletop, even if it's not perfect. Most people will just enjoy seeing painted models on the tabletop, no matter how you have decided to paint them. Because he has two feathers on sort of either side of each other, I decided I wanted one with green at the bottom and then red at the tip, and then I decided to paint the other one the other way around, just for a little bit of added contrast and fun, and to make it easy at a glance to see that there are actually two feathers. I also used the red color on the small piece of armor he has here on his leg, mainly because I have used red like this on the pieces of armor on the legs of my Soros warriors, and I thought this would help it tie these two kinds of models together. I then used Volupus Pink, one of the contrast paints again, for the, I don't know, is it a fin, a crest, whatever the thing he's got on his head is called. And I know it looks perhaps not that pink, it looks more like it's purple or something, but it doesn't matter too much because I'm going to be highlighting it a lot later on, so it's not that important. It just has to be sort of the correct base color, and it doesn't have to be exactly right. The model I'm painting here is the banner bearer, and I decided that since he has this very elaborate serpentine banner, I wanted to tie that into the rest of the model's color scheme as well. So I also used the Volupus Pink here, just because, I mean, then I get to add a little bit more pink to the overall color scheme, which is always great. And also because, again, it would help make sure that these two parts of the model look like they actually belong together. Then I used the Achillean green, very thinned down and with a very sharp brush, to paint out some of the ridges in the feathers, just to make sure it doesn't just look like one big blob of color, but that you can actually see it's supposed to be feathers. I would say if you are in a bit of a hurry or you just don't enjoy doing stuff like this is definitely a step you could skip, but this is something that I find really fun and enjoyable, so that's why I wanted to spend some time doing it. I also used the Achillean green to paint in some of the ridges here on his fin, for a lack of a better word, to make sure that, again, it would stand out and you could see that there were differences between light and shadow. Then, because I wasn't happy, as I said, with the skin tone, I basically painted all over it using the Vallejo Aquamarine. Not quite, I mean, the base tone is fine, but I thought it looked way too uneven and it just didn't really work for me. So I used the Vallejo Aquamarine, thinned down a little bit, to paint the entire surface of the skin. I then mixed it with a bit of white to add some final highlights, and I will definitely admit that this step could have perhaps benefited from a little bit more time and attention and care, but as I said, I don't really enjoy painting skinks, ordinary skinks, that much at this stage, so I just wanted something that would look fine and not sort of off or wrong next to the rest of the model. But I also wanted something that was fairly quick and easy to do. Also, I think the skink rider's skin is not what is gonna hopefully grab people's attention. I hope it's stuff like the small pink feathers and the green skin on the Raptadon itself. Then it was time to start working on the scales on his back, which is another part of the painting process that I really enjoy, which is why painting Seraphon is like sort of the optimal army for me, because they have a lot of scales and I just think it's so satisfying. I'm not that great at big smooth surfaces where you need to do like really careful color graduations and stuff, but something that's a little bit more graphical in nature and with smaller details that you can do something weird or fun with, that's right up my alley. And so painting scales, I love it. The color I'm using here is Mood Green from Citadel, which is a nice bright green. And then I am highlighting the scales with one of the green fluorescent paints you saw me using earlier. And this one is called Quantum Green, which is the lighter version of the two. And I highlighted it in a sort of like an edge highlight sort of style, where I tried just to touch sort of the top half of the scales, but if the scales are really small, they'll just get a dab of color and then that's fine. It's not that big of a deal. I also use this same color to highlight the green on the feathers, because both, I mean, they don't have to be two different green colors or tones, and it's a lot quicker to paint something if you already have it ready to go on your wet palette. So if I can almost cheat a little bit and use the same colors for more than one thing at a time, I definitely will. Then the last highlight is the fluorescent yellow color, Starfire Yellow, and I try just to use a touch of that because I want to make sure that the scales look green and not like they are just a yellowish green. They have to be green with just a final highlight. I also use this yellow color for the feathers. I would actually prefer if I could use a warmer tone for the feathers, but I really want the feathers to be fluorescent so that they will light up under a UV light, which has, as I have said many times before on this channel, no practical value, but I just think it's fun and enjoyable. So yeah, I went with the not quite ideal color to get a really weird effect that I will never ever use. But yeah, there you go. Then for the red piece of armor here, I am highlighting that with another fluorescent color from Huge Miniatures, and this one is called Radar Red, and I'm just doing a simple edge highlight. I don't want to do anything more with it. I don't think it's something that really needs that much care and attention, and again, it's the same color I have used for highlighting the same pieces of armor on the Soros Warriors, and so it will just make them match a little bit better on the tabletop. And again, I am using this same color for highlighting the feathers. You could definitely do more levels of highlights on stuff like the feathers. Here I'm just giving them one, and that's because this is for tabletop, and so highlighting something as small as this with multiple layers of highlights, that is just not something I'm actually willing to spend the time on. And I'm sorry, this is a little bit out of focus. I'm not quite sure why, but I hope you can still see what's going on. This is the head, like the serpent head for the banner, and I'm painting that with a purple color, and this one is again from Huge Miniatures, and it's called Ultraviolet. And the reason I went with that is just to differentiate it a little bit from the rest of the model. And then once I have painted sort of the bulk of the banner using the purple paint, I can then go back in and highlight the details with the pink, which will help tie it all together, I think. So I'm again using the same pink color, the fluorescent color from Huge Miniatures mixed with some fluoropigments to highlight the edge of the mouth and also sort of the eyebrows. I then highlighted the tips and sort of the corners on the banner using again the same mixture for the pink, and then just a little bit of white added to that. And as you can see, I also ended up using a little bit of pink to highlight the purple on the banner, and that's because I ended up thinking that the purple was just slightly not right, because there isn't a lot of purple on the rest of the model, so I wanted to make sure that it fit in a little bit better. Perhaps it would have benefited from some other color choice than the purple, I'm not quite sure, but I mean, it's fine. Again, tabletop, you can do whatever, and I really didn't feel like going back and redoing it and finding out exactly what would work even better, so I just decided to go with the purple and pink and let it be done with that. Then for the again the fin or whatever on the rider's head, I used the same mixture of pink, and I tried to paint them in sort of like ridges to make sure you could see the texture that is going on there. And once I had done that, I then went back with a little bit of white mixed in to carefully highlight it. And here you can see the final result. I am really happy with this. I think it is exactly as I wanted it to be. I wanted something that would really pop and look really bright and vivid on the tabletop, and I definitely think that this color scheme achieves that. It is slightly over the top. Slightly, I mean, it's quite over the top, but that is perfect for the Lollipop Lizards, and I am really happy that I finally got around to painting all of these, because I have I have been pushing them for a long time, just because, I don't know, there is something about the Raptidons that made them really difficult for me to paint as a unit. I have painted multiple other color schemes, but none of them really clicked for me. And finally, I'm quite happy with it, and I can even see myself painting a unit or two more of these if I want more on the tabletop for my army. And as I said, the fluorescent paints, they will allow you to have stuff that glows under a UV light. And I really enjoy this part of the painting process. I only turn on the UV light after I'm all done with painting, so it comes as a sort of nice bonus at the end of a painting project. And since this is, I think this is one of the painting projects I've had where most of it is actually glowing. So that was just really fun and really exciting. Yeah, I'm silly that way. Sorry. So that was what I wanted to show you today, and I hope you like it. And if you have any sort of questions or comments or anything, please let me know. But before we leave, I would just like to take the opportunity to thank the wonderful people who support Dice and Demons over on Patreon. So thank you so much to Thomas Madsen, Jordan Hollands, Queen's Wolf, Double J's Terrain, Mola, Steve Eberly, Nassim Makaya, Andrea Correa, Anthony Paul Castro, Gwenna L, Jen Crocker, Bosworth the Rogue, Mando Project, Starcon85, S. Bear, Economicus, Elliot Philby, Dr. Tom Zimbardo, Cyber Fossil, Cinnamon Coffee 87, Terrainery, Joshua and Anya Pavelczyk, Charlie Robertson, and VT Knight 007. If you would like to join them, I will leave a link to my Patreon down in the show notes. Also remember all the YouTube stuff like, comment, share, whatever, subscribe of course. And again, any sort of questions you have, any suggestions you have for future painting projects, please let me know. And as always, I will do my very best to get back to you. I'm not always great at it, I know, and I'm sorry, but it's stuff like this that I can sometimes really struggle with my, I don't know, ADHD and my autism. I'm not quite sure which it is or if it's both. So I read every single comment, and if I don't respond, know that it's not because I don't want to, it's just sometimes it's really difficult for me to do. So please leave a comment, and again, I'll do my best to get back to you. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye.